welcome to ABA Inside Track Book Club, the book club podcast that's like reading a whole book, but in your car, but safer. Did that one work? It was my new intro for our book club episode. What do you think?
I like it.
It was good? Okay.
I really do.
Smooth.
Okay, good. Welcome. I'm joined as always at book club by my fabulous co-hosts.
You know, it's me, Jackie.
And it's me, Diana.
And book club guy, Alan.
Alan, I was going to say, I want you to be your fabulous co-host because you've done so many of these. But if you weren't going to, I would give you a separate name. You'd be our book club buddy. It was my working title. No, okay, I'm getting the no.
I like book club guy. I like book club guy.
Book club guy.
Book club guy, Alan. We're gonna make him a card.
Oh yeah, you put that right under your name.
He'll just show up at all book clubs. It doesn't matter what you're reading. He'll just show up and trash the book and then leave. Just kidding.
All right, next season we'll do 50 Shades of Grey.
We're gonna have a positive book club experience.
I think it's a positive book. Well, before we talk about whether we're positive or negative on the book, I want to remind our listeners that this is our podcast about behavior analysis and behavior analytic books. And if you're listening to this in the spring of 2022, it means you are one of our Patreon supporters, and we thank you so very, very much. If you're listening to this in the far distant future, I really hope that you're like the nurture effect. You mean the thing that we all do every day and the government banded together and got over its bipartisan crap to implement all of these things? Oh yes, what a wonderful world we live in. Though I fear that you'll just be listening to this in 2023 and saying, oh, things are worse than ever, and the nurture effect too didn't have the effect we thought. But, let's not be pessimistic because we'll be talking about the book The Nurture Effect today. And that is The Nurture Effect, How the Science of Human Behavior Can Improve Our Lives and Our World by Anthony Biglan. And this was voted on by patrons from books about, it was sort of the general theme was ACT, but this one sort of snuck in as a general wellness, help the world book, but there are plenty of ACT discussions within the book too. So I think it squeaks by in the original poll. So we're going to be talking about that today. So why don't we start with kind of some general thoughts on the nurture effect, on kind of your general what had you read it before? Is it something that you were interested in reading, and whether it lived up to your expectations?
Well, I like to judge a book by its cover, even though you're advised not to. And I've always liked the cover of this book, which is like a nest with the earth in it. Is that right?
Kind of.
That's exactly
Yeah, it's exactly what it is. It's a mossy nest.
It kind of looks like the earth has sort of been smooshed a little bit, though. I always thought that's what it was. It was a smooshed earth.
No, it's an egg.
It's an egg earth.
It's an egg earth in a nest.
Okay.
And so I find the cover quite appealing.
Okay.
And then not only did I like the cover of the book, I liked the contents of the book as well.
That's good.
So there's my book report on The Nurture Effect by Anthony Biglan.
But don't take my word for it.
I give you an A, Diana. That was a good book club report. I read this book initially after I saw Dr. Biglan present at a conference. And I thought that maybe I wanted to replace a book in my radical behaviorism class for this book. So I read this book. I didn't replace it, but I think, there are some really key points that I'm excited to talk about in this book. Overall, I was like, yep. But I also really know about behavior analysis, right? So I think there was like, if this is not like doesn't say like behavior analysis, right? Mm-hmm. Which I like because then, and the cover, I also like the cover too, Diana. Mine's got coffee on it, which is funny because I don't even drink coffee. So I'm not sure who spilled coffee all over it.
It was me.
But I like that I could see this book appealing to a broader audience than just behavior analysis.
Yeah.
Right. But I can see the infusion of behavior analysis very strongly throughout the book, which I appreciate. Right. And for me, sometimes I was like, of course, while I'm reading. But again, I'm a behavior analyst, right? And this is what I do. So that's kind of my behavior analytic book club takeaway.
Yeah.
All right. How about you, Alan?
Well, I think I'd read a chapter or two, but never the whole book. I'm glad to have read it, but I can't say it's my favorite book. Again, I
Someday we're
appreciate
going to
it.
read your favorite book.
I know I'm pretty hard to please sometimes. It reminded me of when we read Nudge, and it was hard for me to know who the audience was because he's casting such a wide net that it feels like he falls short in several places because he doesn't pursue an avenue of thinking or argument because he would probably lose some people, and I totally get that. I think it does a good job of introducing people to sort of behavior analytic thinking without just having all of our jargon throughout all the time on every page. So it's very accessible. I could give this to some of my friends and be like, hey, if you kind of want to know how behaviorism and my job inform my outlook on the world, here you go. But I think that there are areas where, as a writer, he could have done things differently, especially since it was written in 2015. It felt a little like, here we're talking about this nice new behaviorism and the year's 1975 because he's just so enthusiastic about it and doesn't address some of the shortcomings about our history that I think are important to remember and almost whitewashes over them, I'm afraid. So I would never recommend this book like alone. So...
You mean reading it alone? You're like, you should always read with a buddy. I'm just kidding. But wouldn't that be funny?
Yeah, well, most people I know probably wouldn't read this without me being like, now why am I reading this? So
That's what the point of book club is, right?
yeah, true.
Yeah.
The buddy system.
I think I found, this happens sometimes when we either have a book or like a series of episodes coming up. And so, when we're recording this, we've recorded a number of episodes or in the process of recording a number of episodes specifically talking about prevention and nurturing, trauma-informed treatment, which I think kind of falls into that same category of, trying to build a nurturing relationship. So I think this book sort of hit when everything I was reading was pointing to this idea of prevention as an important goal for our society rather than waiting for things to fail. It's okay. I think when I think about it long enough, that's probably been my attitude to a lot. And I think issues of scaling. And one of the things I think this book does well in that it doesn't cover any one topic particularly in detail. And some areas, I think it goes into maybe too much detail for the average reader, but it really does try to start small to hook people in and then get bigger and bigger in terms of its scope. So there's something about sort of the narrative device of starting with, we'll talk about like in chapter 1, the mother and the baby, that's the first relationship. And what are the systems and what are the preventative programs that might support improving that relationship? And how does that improve outcomes later on? And then getting into the family, and then getting into schools, then getting into peer groups, then getting into larger society, then getting into capitalism, and getting into, not exactly the war on poverty, but sort of the idea of, poverty as a real epidemic in our society, and what can we do about that? And then sort of wrapping it all up in 220 pages. It's a pretty quick read overall. So while I think, yes, if you were a behavior analyst and you want a lot more detail, I definitely found sections of this book where I felt like, Biglan sort of is like, this is a great program. Anyway, here's another one. And then there were others that he spent more time on. So like he spends a lot of time on the good behavior game because, he works with people, still who do research on the good behavior game. So he had more information there. Others, it feels like he's like, someone told me about this program and I looked into it and it seemed pretty good. So your mileage may vary as to the individual recommendations in the book, but I think the theme is important. And I think I mentioned this to you the other day, Diana. We were watching a movie, and I think you're critiquing me for something. I was being too conservative, or something about that. And I said, I don't know, Diana. Between the nurture effect and all the topics we've been doing, I feel like half of the things I believed for my entire adult life are out the window and wrong, and I'm having a real moment. So forgive me, everyone, if I break into tears in our book club or start, rending garments. Because I'm all in on nurturing and preventative care and helping people in a way that I don't think I was in my 20s or 30s when I was, very conservative minded.
What was the thing that I was presenting to you?
I don't know. I think I said I wanted to keep Ronald Reagan as a president I liked, even though he is behind a lot of things that if I think too much on, not good. But you know what? I want to keep that illusion. I'll throw out everything else I believe, but let me keep that one. Can I keep that one? Was that not it?
No, I
Okay.
don't know. I can't remember. It was something like very innocuous.
Okay.
I love that
I'll
word, innocuous.
I'll try and
Innocuous.
remember. It was better than that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it was not totally off topic. Ronald Reagan, not by name, but does come up in the context of the nurture effect when we talk about capitalism run amok. All right, so overall, some general positive vibes, though I think our mileage varied a little bit, which, you know, it wouldn't be an ABA Inside Track book club if we didn't have some variation, which is good because it makes for a much better discussion than if we all just gushed or hated on any one book. So let's talk about the author very briefly. The author is Anthony Biglan, who has been in the field of psychology and behavioral science, i.e. behavior analysis, for over 30 years. He works at the Oregon Research Institute, which the way he describes it makes me think Oregon must be some sort of a paradise where they've solved all of these social problems. I don't know. Oregon listeners, please write in. A lot of his claim to fame really came in to his work on preventative work towards cigarette smoking or smoking cessation, and many of the trials that tobacco companies and the marketing firms that support tobacco companies were on. He had to look at all that research and present papers. And over the past number of years, he's become, you know, a big proponent of preventative care. He's been involved in the Society for Prevention Research, the Institute of Medicine Committee on Prevention. If it has prevention in the title, I think Anthony Biglan must somehow be involved with the group. And as much as, you know, when someone says, I've been doing this for 30 years, you get the sense like, oh, the nurture effect, that must have been the culmination of his career and we'll never hear from him again. Wrong! This dude's still publishing. I went to a website that he started called, where is it? Sorry, Values to Action, which is even more, if you thought the nurture effect was sort of like not quite as, you know, progressive as you'd want, well, the Values to Action website seems much more anti-capital, maybe not anti-capitalism, but like really is taking a hard stance about a lot of the things that we think of as sort of part of American society. Probably they shouldn't be. And it's the website states that it is working to support a less toxic society. And they set up these action circles, which is some sort of a Swedish idea they said on the website, where individuals can join these small groups to work on parts of bigger problems. It sounded very interesting. I did not join. However, I did purchase a copy of his most recent 2020 book, Rebooting Capitalism. So I got that coming in the mail to me. But in the meantime, he's also published, you know, continued studies on the good behavior game, on, you know, I don't know how he can keep writing about nurturing. I feel like he said a lot of it in this book, but he's still publishing articles and some of the adolescent and child psychology journals about nurturing. So he is still very active in prevention, and I suppose will be for 40 years.
He's a clinical psychologist. Is that his?
That was his, yeah, this is his background. Yeah, but he's a behavior analyst, though he never mentions it by name. When this book came out in 2015, it was, you know, I tried to find reviews at the time because I'm always curious, like, what are the reviews for scientific books like this? Do they even get reviewed? Scientific American said it was very good. They gave it a good review. And the behavior analyst actually reviewed it. Derek Reed reviewed the book. He said it was the most kind of understandable description of ACT he had read in a long time. So he was very, very positive there. He felt it really kind of went up there with, and I'm paraphrasing very broadly, so you should go read The Behavior Analyst in 2015 if you want exact, you know, Dr. Reed's exact words. But he felt it really kind of covered a lot of the same ground and then brought forward more information that, say, you know, Skinner's old works on how we can change society, and then coercion and its fallout, which was a subject of a previous book club. With ACT sprinkled in was sort of was kind of my takeaway from his review. Though he did mention, and was a little sad, he was trying to make it not sound like he was sour grapes, but the word behavior analyst or behavior analysis was only mentioned one time in the entire book, even though there were some references to Java itself. And while he, you know, Derek Reed doesn't say like that's a huge problem, he does feel it was a missed opportunity because Biglan's clearly a behavior analyst to not mention behavior analysis with the book to sort of kind of get the word out about behavior analysis out there. And it is one of those situations I never quite understand why behavioral science among some circles, it's like, we don't want to say behavior analysis because that'll turn off the audience, but behavioral science, that's the term. I never quite understand that.
I can see that, right? We don't have the best following right now, right? We're classically in the history of psychology, we're the scapegoats,
Yeah.
right? Whereas behavioral science isn't.
I like the term behavioral science.
I do too. I like it a lot.
Probably the better. Yeah, it seems like the more marketable term.
Well, and it also puts us in a context of a community of practitioners rather than claiming all the credit, which I think used to happen far more often and probably still far too often. Whereas behavior science as a phrase includes people who like the early intervention, naturalistic behavioral developmental intervention people. They're like, we're not really behavior analysts, but we use behavioral analytic principles in forming our theories. Like, we are part of the same community, even if they are not exactly what we are. And so I'm all for that. That's good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that point, Alan, just in terms of the increased inclusivity. I think it is something that as a field you're seeing more in some of the kind of the new areas of research where we don't have any practice to pull from within behavior analysis. So we're looking into psychology, nursing, and other fields to really kind of inform our advances. And I do think I agree. I think that is the way to go. I don't see any point in making enemies with our terms, and it's not going to lead to any of the gains brought forward in the nurture effect. That's for sure. Because I think one of the other sad things about reading this book is while there are so many great ideas, it is very hard not to read it and say, well, geez, if everybody knows the answers to all of society's problems, why is everything such a freaking mess still? And while I think the book does work very hard to speak to a very broad audience, to the point that there are sections at the end called action implications, where they're like, hey, did you like this chapter? Well, if you're a parent, here's some things you could do. If you're the president of the United States, here's some steps you might want to take. Really is trying to give everyone some things that they can proactively do to support this work. But then you sort of get the sense, maybe it's different in Oregon, but I get the sense here of like Anthony Biglan could come give a talk and everyone would be like, yeah, okay, thank you. And just sort of continue on with the way they've been doing things. So it was really hard not to get a little down in reading this book. You'd read a positive idea and then say, well, no one's going to do this. And then read another positive idea and say, I don't think anyone's going to do this.
It did feel discouraging in that there are so many areas in which, a lot of his points here are that there should be, policy level changes and influence. And there's so many areas that the people that know what could be effective and what types of changes could be made have none of that influence. And it seems like such a long shot for any of those types of, policy changes to actually occur. That felt discouraging to me, even knowing that there's the sciences out there and like some like germs of research have been conducted. And I know I talked to you about this too. I was like, there was, the whole like long-term project looking at direct instruction in schools and how we know that that's more effective than other strategies for teaching, but it was never adopted in our education system for whatever reason. So that to me feels discouraging. Like, even if you know what might be effective, it doesn't mean that it's going to happen. And I think that the work that we do in, working with individuals with disabilities is really important work. So I don't want to discount that, but there's all these other areas that are in all of these chapters here. It's like things could be done better, right? You don't have to call it behavior analysis. It's just things could be done so much better. And no one's out there doing it, and no one's attempting to exert influence in those spheres. Mm-hmm. But it would be the changes that would need to occur aren't even necessarily that difficult.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think part of the subtext of the book too, especially when you get to the later sections when they're talking about marketing, they're talking about the current form of capitalism. You do get a sense of everyone who is interested in change is powerless, because the people who have all the power have zero interest in promoting a society that would follow along with any of these recommendations, because it is directly counterproductive to their stated goals. The idea of a business it's illegal for a business to not continue to make more money every single month. Like, what? I just thought that was sort of like a bad idea someone came up with. The idea that it's illegal to have stockholders and to not do everything in your power to make more money every quarter is disgusting to me. As someone who owns tons of crap and likes buying things to fill the giant hole in my censure, I'm disgusted by this idea.
Exhibit A. Exhibit B.
Not everyone can see. We moved the camera too, so everyone can see the shelves. But it did feel like a real, let's speak truth to power, and they won't even bother hearing us because what do they care? We're still going to buy their crap. And so,
I always thought that phrase meant that if you spoke the truth, that it would blossom into power.
No,
you would speak truth into power.
I think it's like a child.
But
looking up at
now I
their
think I
parent.
understand. You say to the people who have the power, you tell them the truth, and it's supposed to change their mind.
And they walk right past you.
Yeah. Okay.
Or have you killed or something. I don't know what they do. I don't have any power, so.
I do think there's another component, though, in addition to like policymakers and people in power. But I think there's also some conversations within our community and with our own historical and current clients and families that we need to address and resolve. Talking, the book goes into about like coercion and things like that. And those are conversations we're having right now. And so if we can resolve those, then maybe we will all be able to actively promote some of these ideas together rather than sort of not infighting, but having we have a lot of criticism that we need to take before we can get people behind these ideas on a larger scale.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's a really good article that was just written along those same lines in the most recent issue of Behavior Analysis and Practice. I probably should have looked up the name because now it's escaping me. It's like they have a voice. Are we listening?
Oh yeah,
it's so good, and it kind of hits that. I think all the points that you just brought up.
Do you remember the authors?
I'm looking it up right now. It's early issue. Or Early View. I love Early View. Early View is the best. It is by Venezano and Shea. They have a voice. Are we listening? Behavior Analysis and Practice 2022.
I'm going to critique them right now. They should have saved that title for the book that they wrote after the paper. That's too good. You can't waste on a research article.
It is so good. That is a great title. I hope that they thought of that in the shower or like while they were sleeping.
They were told, no, they were jamming. They were jamming on their research. I don't know if it's a survey or a review of the research, but they were totally jamming on. They were like, it's like they have a voice. Wait a minute. Say it again. It's like one of those in the biopic of the writing of the article. That scene will be in the movie. All right. Well, so I think and as much as I feel like I'm sounding so doom and gloom, I did read this over our April vacation, and I returned to work in a really good mood. And I don't think it was because I got a lot done over April vacation, because it was somewhat stressful of a vacation. But I feel like I read this book and I came back saying, you know what I want to do? I want to help people again. Because I was feeling a little burnt out through February through March. I don't know if listeners could hear it, but I was getting really down. And I did feel a little rejuvenated by the idea of we can solve problems. There are solutions, whether or not everyone's going to listen to them or be interested in them. At least they're there, right? We know more now than we did 40 years ago. And we understand who is not interested in that change and why they might not be interested in that change, because we understand human behavior. And it's not a bad thing to want to proactively support other people. Because for years, I was very much, I was one of those kids who, when I'd read all my, papers in my psychology undergrad, and they'd talk about, correlation, like, people, families with low socioeconomic classes, have children who tend to, struggle more or engage in more criminal behavior later on. And my take home for that is like, well, what are you going to do if the poor people, they just do bad things? And I totally missed the point of, no, it's not that they do bad things. It's like part of them. It's because there are activities we could do to support those families. It's correlational. And I think this book got me many years later, and I'm very embarrassed that it took me so many years to really put it all together. There are things that we can do to support people in need rather than just sort of shrug and say, well, they're going to have problem kids, and they're going to not make a lot of money, and they're not going to provide. It's like, no, that's missing the point of, allowing systems that fail to just continue on and wait until they fail to say, let's act now, when it's hard and expensive and it's potentially not, the return of investment starts lowering. And why are we waiting? Why can't we do these things early? So I was very much in the mood to make some significant changes in life. And we'll see if that makes it through the rest of the school year. But, right now at least, I'm very pumped, very excited.
Yeah. But, it's good that you have been able to think about that differently. But I also think that that's a product of our society and the way that often we are taught to think, and how our society does not support these types of prevention programs and or individuals who need support.
The phrase "they gotta learn" in a very coercive context comes to mind, and made to Rob too, since he still works in schools. That's a phrase I always loathed, because it meant that it was their responsibility, not our responsibility, to teach and aid and support and nurture, but rather the fault of the person in need for not having skills that no person learns alone. So
it's very true. All right, well, let's enough of me waxing philosophical. Let's get into some details about the book. So first off, for folks who are thinking about reading this book, I kind of mentioned it already. I really like the organization of the book. And while I feel like those of you who read a lot of papers, read a lot of books like this, I'll be honest, you could probably read like the first 2/3 and then sort of put it down and say, all right, that's good. I got everything out of it. Because it does start with, what the basics of behavior analysis, which you could skip that section, though I think it is worth talking about a few differences in why this is a book about behavioral science rather than purely behavior analysis. Then
it's not like coercion and its fallout.
No,
like that.
Which like, who is this?
The level
this is for
of detail
behavior
that Sigmund
analysts.
did in that book. It's nothing like that.
So amazing, but it is not for anyone but behavior analysts. Then part 2 gets into...
like, time for some rat research.
I like that section. That's my favorite section of that book.
Sorry.
No problem. Part 2 gets into sort of, the microcosms of change, starting, like I said, with, mother and infant, to young children, to teens, to schools, to peer groups, to larger, neighborhoods, right? And then part 3 gets into the more large scale, how do, specifically American, but how do American components really fail to nurture our citizenry through capitalism, and not just capitalism, but through kind of the bastardization of capitalism that has occurred in the past 40 years. And
unbridled, I believe is
unbridled capitalism. And then it kind of comes back to a part 4 where there are a couple nice touchy-feely phrases, but to be honest, it really just reiterates exactly what you've read about in the book before. So again, if you have not a lot of time and you're like, if only I had a book that were like 170 pages about about nurturing, great, just read this book and you can skip the last section. It just cycles back, which I guess if you were not a behavioral scientist or in the field, I could see how having those nice sum-up sections would really be a great way to sort of reiterate the main points when you may have lost it, when they're like, the Triple P parenting program. Like, there's too many programs.
What's funny is that now that I'm thinking about it, the first time I read it, I actually stopped right around the 180 page point, because I was like, oh, this is the summary. And I skimmed through it. But then I was thinking, isn't that what professors do? They bring up all their points and then bring it along home. So
bring it on home.
Right. So what he's doing is just making sure that everybody gets the main takeaways. So you could either read the first part of the book or the second part. You can choose.
I would say if you are new to behavioral science, you might want to start with part 4 and then come back. If you are listening to this podcast, so you're probably going to want to read the first 2/3 of the book.
Yeah.
I just want to bring up that it actually sort of goes to the point of this is maybe a marker of one of his intended audience. I mean, Jackie, you said that you'd considered replacing it in your syllabus as using it as a replacement. Well, that section is like, oh, this is aimed at psychology students, potential behavior analyst students, because it has that sort of textbook academic format of like, here's the meat and then here's the like framework for a study guide.
Totally, right?
Yeah.
But if you do not read the last chapter, though, you will miss maybe the cheesiest section of the book, in which Anthony Biglan describes, it's like a 2-page scenario of what he hopes the future is like with nurture, which was, if he, depending on, I don't know him personally, but like the picture they have at the back of the book, it's like, oh, thank you so much for your.
Maybe he wrote that first. Maybe it was
maybe.
So when
his dream journal.
I used to do creative writing, and we would have an exercise where you had to write for 5 minutes straight, and you couldn't pick up your pen from the page, right? You had to continue writing the entire 5 minutes. Maybe it was that. Maybe it was one of those exercises, and that's what he produced.
Maybe.
And it was the impetus for the whole rest of the book.
It was very cute, except for the part where he talked about the wellness. He talked about the National Wellness Index started in 2020, to which I just thought, we didn't do jack in 2020. I know you can't look 5 years in the future, Dr.
I know,
Biglan,
when he was talking about
but it really brought me out of your
epidemiology and stuff.
Yeah.
I went back to see when the book was written. I was like, oh.
Yeah, it really
he
brought
probably
me out.
wishes he could update that.
Brought me to the future. Exactly. I know. It's not his fault. It's 2015. He didn't know.
He didn't know.
He didn't know. All right. So let's briefly talk about chapter 1, which is my favorite because it's part 1, chapter 1. It's the only part. It's the only chapter in the part. So you really feel like you're flying through the book already.
I wonder why that happened. I actually wondered that too. I wonder why that was decided to put the book into parts when it really was just a chapter.
I mean, I think the parts read well in terms of I want something that's practical for me as an individual versus I want something that's looking at a more societal wide scale. And then you need to have a chapter in which you're like, here are some basic terms and some basic principles you're going to want to know. And it just sort of made sense to put it in as its own part in its own chapter.
Okay.
Study guide.
So I expected this section to really just go hard into like, and then B.F. Skinner did the end. It wasn't. Skinner gets mentioned. It's very mostly positive mentions. There's one kind of cryptically negative mention, which if we get to, I might bring up. But really, Tony Biglan starts by talking about evolutionary theory, which I don't know if I was just expecting to read a more behavior analytic book, but talking about Darwin and evolutionary theory, that really threw me for a loop in terms of I had never really thought about evolution as kind of a component or as possibly as a forerunner of some behavior analytic thought before. I mean, I thought about evolution in terms of passing my biology AP.
Don't you think about selection?
Selection, no, but exactly. I never thought about it. I never thought about
You didn't take
selection
my
by
class.
consequence. I didn't take your class. No, I'm sorry. I didn't take your class. I never thought about selection by consequence. Would it be awesome or would it be unethical?
No, I said awkward.
Oh, how awkward would it be? I got an in with the professor, folks. Ugh.
No, thank you.
No, geez, sorry. Okay.
Go ahead.
I never really thought about selection by consequence when it comes to natural selection as having anything to do with behavior selected by consequence. I just always thought of them as I never thought of them as related. I just thought of them as two separate things in two separate contexts.
Right. So we talk about, phylogenetic selection, which is like Darwin type of genetic selection. And then there's ontogenic selection, so behavior that's selected for within your lifetime. And then there's cultural selection, so behavior that's selected by the community as a whole. And that's where all of your social rules and mores and higher level things come into play.
And it's also a good link for like our link to developmental psychology and for especially like attachment theory and some of that, which again, we're having those conversations within our field now, but it's good that it's a big umbrella because it's not just about ABA.
Very true. That's why I guess we put ABA in the title of our podcast, but we probably should have put something less specific because it's not always what we talk about. Mostly what we talk about, I guess.
Mostly. Yeah.
Mostly.
Yeah, like 99%.
99%.
They mostly come at night, mostly.
Oh my God, Alan, that's exactly what I was thinking. 10 points for you. 10 reference points. Hey everybody, quick pause from the full discussion to give you the first of our secret code words. Again, if you're listening to this on Patreon, we want to thank you so very much. And one of the ways we're going to thank you is by saying you need to know these 2 code words. Go to the Patreon page for this post, which again, the link will be in your podcast app, and you'll be able to get 2 CEs for listening to this, 2 learning credits for no additional charges. Just a big, big thank you for supporting us. So here we go. The first of those secret code words is NEST. N-E-S-T, like the nest that the little Earth egg is on in the cover of the Nurture Effect. How cute. Nest. I think that was really the only section in this chapter that really, I don't want to say blew my mind, but I was a little taken aback of like, I should probably think more about the scale of evolution and the scale of selection by consequences in the history of science as a whole. Then we get into some other sections, in the book related to sort of, how did prosociality develop in terms of, our societies, when we worked together, our prosocial behavior was reinforced because we were able to kill all the dinosaurs or, whatever we were eating at the time, and that's sort of how the Flintstones lied
Only
to me.
in their Fisher-Price book did dinosaurs and cavemen coexist. And every time we're on that page, I'm like, but dinosaurs and cavemen did not really live together. Next page.
I'm just kidding.
Woolly mammoths, as the Epcot ride would tell me. And then, sort of just the development of behavioral science kind of continuing to expand or maybe contract or become more precise throughout the 20th century. And then, this is where, our Skinner comes in, and our discussion of sort of, why we develop certain, patterns of human behavior. We're not better than animals in terms of the procedures that will work and be effective. And then Biglan gets pretty quickly to, these are the big 4 points I'm going to be discussing in this book, which are the ideas of we will build a better society if we promote and reinforce prosocial behavior, if we minimize socially and biologically toxic conditions, if we set limits on the influences and opportunities to engage in problem behavior, and if we promote mindful, flexible, and pragmatic pursuits of prosocial values. So there's the act component in these 4, that psychological flexibility. But really the idea that if we don't create environments that reinforce these behaviors that are sort of the universal, talk about kind of like almost the behavioral vaccine kind of talk we have when we talk about the good behavior game. If we don't promote these values in our society, why would we expect to see changes down the line? And if we just pick the main factors involved in most of the problems we're seeing, well, we should see solutions to many of these problems occur, and we should see improvement in many of these areas. I mean, anything in this chapter, is a nice summary chapter, but anything in here that either jumped out at you as, yes, I totally agree, or like, you're missing the point, Tony?
I think he goes by Tony.
I don't know. I'm going to call him Tony.
I've heard him. He goes by Tony.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think the big thing that he does that I think is important is he uses psychological flexibility in how he's writing about his development and the development of our field. Mm-hmm. How Alfie Kahn is a big critic of reinforcement-based practices, and how he's initially distressed by that, but he accepted that criticism and has developed a more nuanced view and understands that reinforcement systems are not cut and dry, and that on the individual level there needs to be special consideration. And so that's a psychologically flexible approach. Is he has this initial like, I don't like that this is criticizing something I like, and then it's like, but okay, what can I do to address it and get around it and accept that there is truth in this person's statement?
Mm-hmm.
One thing I really liked in the chapter here, if I'm thinking, both as a professor and someone as not behavior analytic, right? I really like his discussion on coercion and the different ways that coercion is present in just general society, right? Because I think as non-behavior analysts, we think of coercion like, we don't do that. That's not here, right? That's serious. It's bigger than like our just daily life, right? And I think that like that paragraph or that little like coercion in marriage, when I read that, I wrote hell yes, like on all of the sides, right? because you don't think about like your daily life and your interaction with people as coercive, right? You don't want to anyway. But then you're like, oh yeah, like look, I've probably done that.
Mm-hmm.
I've probably given someone the silent treatment, or right, have done something to make it more likely that they're going to do something in a, provided an aversive event.
Mm-hmm.
And then I really liked how he talked about coercion and depression too, and how like these behaviors may be manifestations of aversive stimuli, right? And so I thought that was nice, because as a reader of behavior analysis, it reminded me, right, that behavior analysis can be infused in like everyday life outside of my work, right, and how I may inadvertently be modifying the environment in which I am in a way that I don't intend, right, because intent doesn't matter, right? And so I really liked that little section here. Apart from the flexibility section, I thought those were like nice little nuggets that like brought it on home, I think, for the general reader and as a good reminder for behavior analysts.
I was just going to say that these types of books, I think, all have to start in a similar place, right? And Nudge does the same thing, which is recognizing that behavior adheres to a set of principles, first of all, right? And those are not, there's no value placed on the principles. It's science. And we can see evidence of how behavior adheres to them in a multitude of ways. And then the other piece, and then Nudge starts this way as well, is just because maybe you don't want to think about how behavior might adhere to these principles, other people probably are. Mm-hmm. And in the same vein, someone is making decisions that are going to have impact on a societal and cultural level. And we're all of our behavior is adhering to a variety of higher level considerations, right, and consequences that we may or may not be aware of. So you may not, you, quote unquote, you may not like the idea that your behavior is being governed by these things, but it is at the end of the day. And we as a society could do better in how those larger systems are constructed. And they can be constructed with the well-being of the citizens in mind.
I would say to anyone who's listening, I don't think anyone listening is going to think this is a problem, but anyone who does not like the idea of our consequences control our behavior, and I'm not like a rat in a cage. I love the fact that we behave that way. I think it explains so much. Think about the rats with the electric shock that attack the other rats. Think about the last time someone honked their horn at you. What was your reaction? Was it, good thing they signaled me so I could slow down and not crash into them? Or was it, I'm going to kill every single person around me and I'm going to drive my car into a tree? Because I'm pretty, maybe not totally that, but I know when I hear a horn, all I can think about is how I want to kill everyone nearby. I want to like crash my car into someone near me. How dare they honk at me? And when I realized like, oh, no, this is a very natural reaction. It's a reaction of an organism to an aversive stimulus. It allows me that psychological flexibility to realize, oh, I'm not a crazy person. I'm controlled by the consequences, just like any other organism. So maybe book club's just really to talk about my own personal problems and psychological flexibility. But I don't know. I like having that chance.
Just two quick points. One, maybe you're okay with it because it doesn't quite like contradict your like deeply held religious and cultural beliefs about what humans are compared to other animals. So it's just one thing.
You're right. No, Alan, very good point. You're right. That is not a problem I have to deal with. I have no problem with that. So that's a very good point, though. And
then just sort of to touch back, I really like his definition of coercion in this, which is coercion involves using aversive behavior to influence another's behavior. And I think that's a really good thing for young behavior analysts, which I am one to remember, is that I'm not using aversive stimuli. I'm engaging in aversive behavior, and therefore it is under my control. It is not this morally neutral thing that I'm trying to use. It is a thing that I am choosing to engage in, and therefore that is why punishment is problematic, and it should not be used in 99% of cases if it, because it is a choice on my part most of the time, especially as a professional. So, and then I also couldn't help but notice that he drops this word intermittently in the section that Jackie was talking about. I'm like, oh, like that's one of the hey, if you're a behavior analyst, intermittent schedules of reinforcement. Ha ha ha. Here's your little drip to keep you engaged.
I think some of the sections on coercion are well written, but at the same time, it is very clear, especially if you've read Coercion and its Fallout, how while so much of what both books are trying to say and the points they're trying to get across are similar, the audience for each book is very, very different. And as much as I think I prefer Coercion and its Fallout as a whole in terms of a scientific book or a very, smart book, I did really like how much Tony Biglan put anecdotes about his own life into some of these sections. I can't remember, we were sort of talking about the idea of depression, which was a topic brought up in Coercion and its Fallout, the idea of, depression or depressive behaviors being controlled by consequences. But I'm thinking of sort of one of the anecdotes that Dr. Biglan brings up later on in the book, talking about psychological flexibility, of how he was having a fight with his wife, or his wife said something mean to him, and how he practices psychological flexibility to think, what was the value? I want to have a happy relationship with my wife. So I'm thinking about the thought of I'm frustrated and it's a silly thought and I'm doing my metaphors. And then I was able to go have a pleasant evening with her. And I usually hate when authors do their little anecdotes in the book, but there was something about the way he did them that it felt always very on topic and very related to his central thesis. I don't know if it's also partially because a lot of what he brings up in terms of preventative medicine and preventative science comes from the direct work he did studying the cigarette industry. Like, if you were like, I don't want to talk about the cigarette industry, well, guess what? It's going to come up in almost every chapter of this book, because a lot of the points, I don't know if it's sort of a chicken and the egg situation, which came first in terms of some of these, the preventative programs versus sort of what do we learn from the cigarette, the anti-smoking movement. But so many of those patterns just keep coming up, and he keeps bringing up good anecdotes about how he studied them, how he learned about the process, and how that relates to so many of the other kind of non-nurturing impacts that marketing, that capitalism, that society can have on the individual. But I quite enjoyed it. I always felt them to be very on point.
Thank you.
Yeah, which hopefully I'll try to stay on point as well.
Yeah.
Why don't we move on to chapter 2?
I told Rob this book made me want to go back and watch Thank You for Smoking. Did you guys see that movie? No? It has...
From the director of Ghostbusters Afterlife.
Eckhart?
It's Aaron Eckhart, and...
It's about a tobacco lobbyist.
Yes, he's a tobacco lobbyist.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. I'm not any better at describing movies than I am at asking questions on this show.
Rob Lowe is in it as well.
Diana.
Just because of
Aaron Eckhart and Rob Lowe. Leave this podcast and go watch Thank You for Smoking from 2007. It's
That's
actually
up in the air. I'm thinking of
it's a good movie. But if anyone does want to leave this podcast and go listen to Coercion and its Fallout, that's episodes 91 and 92.
God, that was a million years ago. How much we've learned since then. All right, let's move on to part 2.
Wow, part 1 is done,
2.
guys.
We did it.
Check.
Woo!
And like I mentioned at the top, the organization of the book really starts with nurturing families and then sort of builds from there. And I did appreciate, I don't know, I think this might, the reader might vary, mileage may vary on this. I sort of liked how much so many of these early chapters really focused on, here's a program that will target these goals I'm talking about, and here's who made it, and here's some research about it, and here are the cost-benefit analysis. And he'd sort of just list them. And he stopped doing that as the book went on, I think, because there stopped being like definitive programs that like, this is the program we use for anti-smoking or for bashing the lobbyists. There stopped being those sort of direct researched programs. But at least in these initial chapters, it was very easy to sort of see, here's 5 programs that probably work. Here's what they do. Here's how they work. Here's the RCT data. And here are the savings if you're a politician and you're skimming this book really quickly, or you're making your aide read the book for you and like give you some notes so you can talk about it at a hearing or what. I don't know. I don't know what to do if you're a politician. If the lobbyists come to you and tell you this is wrong, here are some points you should throw back at them. And I think chapter 2 is probably one if you're a behavior analyst, especially if you are aware of the work of Hart and Risley. You've probably seen some of these programs, if not all of them. I know for me, the idea of the nurse-family partnership, starting right off the bat, bam, if you are a mother and you are having a baby, I think we all know, like, oh, you should have good nutrition and take your prenatal vitamins. But the idea of families where we have either mothers who are young or mothers who are in low socioeconomic classes or mothers who are not have a structure of support to help them raise the baby, this nurse-family partnership idea of having a nurse who's checking in with you throughout your pregnancy.
Dads can raise babies too. Dads can raise babies too.
I understand. I don't know if the dads were a part of the research though. The dads can't carry children to term though.
I would say that you need to think about that because it is in our modern era, dads can. There are men who have uteruses. I'm just going to say that.
Okay. So you are right, Alan. I'm being too
narrow.
Narrow. That's the word. Speaking of uterus, no, uterus is big. Yes, you're right. I'm too narrow in the definition. But so not a but, an and from that, the idea of the primary caregiver from the earliest age is receiving support from a nurse. First on basics of, prenatal care, then on education of how the baby is developing, then on the first 2 years of having an infant. Because I don't know, not all of our listeners, I think, have children. But if you've ever had a baby, your first baby, it is an experience that is unlike any other change you probably can remember experiencing in your entire life. In terms of this baby is gross and tiny, is loud, it demands your constant attention. It does nothing interesting. And it is very easy, especially if you are dealing with other stressors that you would be dealing with, certainly if you're living in poverty, to be mad at the baby, to not know how to respond effectively to the baby's crying, to not understand appropriate soothing behavior. And having this nurse-family partnership as someone to tell you it's okay. That it's okay to have these feelings, that it's okay your baby is crying. Here are the ways, to prompt through some of those initial reactions that you might have. I mean, we were dealing with stressors of poverty. We had our first child, and I wish I had a nurse who told me anything other than, you are very bad at swaddling your baby, and you need to wipe its butt a lot better than you're doing because it won't kill the baby to get all the goo off its rear. Again, no knock on the nurses for our first child, but I kind of wish I had someone who was there some of those first months to walk me through some of the steps, to remind me that it's okay that I'm frustrated, but here's how I want to support my baby and soothe my baby. And how much that in randomized controlled trials supported families or supported, at least they use the term mothers, so I'll use that term that was in the book, to wait longer to have a second child till they had more money, less likely to be on welfare, less likely to abuse children, less likely to be engaged in the criminal justice system. A lot of benefits just from having a person to take an interest, a nurse specifically, take an interest in those early stages. So that was one of the kind of first ideas of here's how we can create a nurturing society from negative day one, right? And I that one really spoke to me as, again, as a parent of 3 children. I still would have loved to have that program with my first child. Maybe not Diana. She was an awesome parent, but I was a bit of a mess.
It is shocking that they just send you home with a baby. Mm-hmm. And there's no...
You'll figure it out. It's okay. Don't worry about it.
Education requirement. I feel like we got a magnet that said, feeling stressed, you can call this hotline. Mm-hmm. If you're,
And even feeding
in
the baby.
like really dire situation.
They're like, yeah, it's like this. Do it like this. And if you don't know to
there's,
say,
like,
no, show me how to do
virtually
it,
nothing
they send you home.
provided to you, which is really shocking that there's not.
I went when I was pregnant. Yeah, when I was pregnant, I actually looked out at my hospital for like a weekly parent group that I showed up to. And that was like, it was like a lactating group or whatever, a lactation group. And that was like where I found all of my information. And you, Diana, I'd text you, send you lewd pictures of my kid's butt. Be like, is this a rash? And you'd be like, never send that again.
Yeah. I was like, how can I delete this picture from my phone?
Well,
But, you know, but Jackie, like, you know, you knew where to look for that
Right.
information, right? And then you had the resources and the time to get yourself there, right? And get that information. And it's not necessarily easy for folks to do that if they don't have
Oh, it
that
wasn't
type
easy
of
for me
access.
either. Yeah,
Right.
it wasn't easy for me. And I knew how
Right.
to do it. And so I can't even imagine if no one tells you that information.
Right.
yeah.
But I mean, if we consider children like the future, which is I think I've heard that in a song before, then you'd think that there would be some type of investment in ensuring at the very minimum their safety, and then beyond that, their success in the early years, given how much we know and what we've talked about in this podcast as well about how critical a nurturing environment is in those early years. But it doesn't exist.
Not, at least not in the U.S., not
Right.
universally. Like that's because it just made me think of the maternity package that they do in a lot of like in Finland. It's like not only like here's more than just a list of what you need. It's this baby needs this, and this baby from the moment it's born is going to be supported by the community by receiving a lot of very key life-sustaining materials.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, you get a box
yeah.
of stuff, like, you know, the basics of what you need, and then the box doubles as a little crib as well. Yeah, everybody gets one.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate, you know, I love a good study about our friends in Northern Europe as much as everybody else and their fabulous culture. But I do appreciate that there have been studies here in America telling us that whether you're looking at it from a, you know, future actual societal benefit, whether you're looking at it a benefit to the individual, or whether you want to crunch the numbers. I think these first chapters especially have those. The Washington State Institute for Public Policy said that this program saved $1 or saved $3.23 for every dollar invested, which is one of those metrics that sounds good. I don't quite understand how they calculate that or what that looks like in real life. But at the same time, it is important to know that this book is talking very much about, well, I mean, our as our you know, your host's country. I know we have listeners who are outside the United States, which is important because so much of the research and the positive benefits that we see in a lot of other countries, it's great to know it exists, but at the same time, those countries aren't our country with its own problems and its own demographics. So as great as those ideas are to, you know, let's try them out, let's see if they work here, without the data, without the research, it's really easy to be like, yeah, but it's, they're so homogenous. It's just a small country. You know, that we can't do that level of support for families here in America. It'll bankrupt us, or it'll cause all these problems, or people won't learn how to raise their children if society takes care of, you know, this kind of the same straw man arguments that we get a lot. And like you said at the beginning, Al, you know, they just won't learn, right? As that sort of rallying cry of the I don't know, the unnurturing, the cranky. I don't even know sometimes who wants to toot that horn. The status quo. Oh, sadly, that's the status quo. You know, this chapter then continues on with, you know, what do you do with children as they grow in the older ages? And again, mention a lot of other research that we've discussed, so certainly Hart and Risley research, and some programs that sort of developed to deal with the 30 million word gap. The Incredible Years is another program. Was there any other sort of program at the sort of like family stage that jumped out at any of you as, yes, why isn't this the norm? Or why is it the first time I'm hearing of such a program?
I was just disappointed that he didn't mention the teaching family model, which is, I was really surprised that he had talked about other programs, but at least a mention and you should read further. Because it's very much the same model of sort of like the nurse partnership, which is there's a mental health professional teaching a whole family a systemic, like, family cultural approach to dealing with these things from exactly the nurturing standpoint that he's talking about.
That's a great point, Alan. Sometimes I read these books and I wonder, is the scope based on I am one person, and while I might be like the head researcher of this big institute, I can only read so many science papers in a given year, and I can only mention so many in my book. So I mention the one that I like the best, or I mention the one that I read the first, or yeah. How does that process go?
It's just such a longitudinal like model. It's been around for such a long time, and behavior analysts and behavioral scientists had a hand in it, along with social workers. And again, it just seemed like a missed opportunity. But the programs he does mention, good examples of his point.
Yeah.
Maybe he's trying to spread the wealth, to some other fields. Jackie, Dan, how about you? Were there any programs that surprised you that not every state is doing them, or this isn't a requirement by law to have these programs a part of your child's education?
I was not surprised, not even a little bit.
How about happily surprised at the effectiveness of any of these programs?
No, I was this chapter was important, but for me, kind of underwhelming. I did like the action implications at the end, right? When they broke it out for parents, policymakers, and citizens. I really liked that key piece, but the rest of it wasn't. It was underwhelming for me.
We are not the audience. We
That's
don't need to be
thing.
convinced.
Right? We already know about some of this, and we've already talked about some of these things before. So I think that's why for us, it felt underwhelming, perhaps. I kind of just wanted more detail. I could have done with a whole book, I think, on this topic.
Right.
You'd lose a lot of readers if this book were 500 pages and went into extensive research on even just the programs mentioned, of which I think there's probably like 15 or maybe 10 to 15 that were mentioned throughout the book in any detail. Some with a good amount of detail, often more the behavior analytic minded ones. Some with a couple paragraphs, not quite as much detail.
Yeah, I did really love the action implications, though, right? Like, I think if I could even just take this for the parents and then give that as like a one-liner for like, what do you do with your young kid, right? I like that. I think that's really good. I like, for the policy makers, require the use of evidence-based programs, even though we're not really sure what those are, right? And across all the boards, across different disciplines, the definition varies. But, I think just providing that, right? If you're a policymaker and you're reading this, then maybe that's something you now start to consider when you might not have before. So I really liked this chapter. My favorite part was the action implications. The rest of it, I was like, yep, right?
I did like just one line, and then I'm done. At the beginning, I'm talking about his friend Kathy and her child Robin, who's a challenge. In a way, I'm sure could have been more considerate of her feelings. I told Kathy the book could help her with her daughter. I was like, okay, that's file that one in again, it can get really easy to be very inconsiderate. And I just like that he called that out of like, oh, I was so helpful. No, I was probably a bit of a jerk.
Right.
But it helped nonetheless. So I'm grateful she listens to me.
Yeah.
I think I was struck by some of these programs, how you expect like, the programs that have the biggest impact on society, they're going to have 1,000 steps, take hundreds of hours, millions of dollars. And then, for example, the family checkup system, that got a lot of section for working with adolescents or families and adolescents, which I think is a really tricky spot. It's to some extent much of the nurture effect, the idea of let's do these things right at the beginning. That's the easy part. What do we do to fix the problems that have occurred because we didn't try to target these strategies or skills at the beginning. But I loved how it was this, like, it's a 12-session program, but parents kept dropping out. So we made it a 3-session program. And it literally was like, we talked to parents about, we were friendly with them. We talked a little about some common problems. We did a home visit where we videotaped some interactions with them in their adolescent, and then we got together a third time and talked about what they did well and some ideas we had of how they could fix things. And if you want to have a couple more sessions, sure, we're here. And how looking at some RCTs with that, at least again in Oregon, which is apparently a utopia that I never knew about on the other side of the country. How, putting these programs into place in some schools, we see like reductions in family conflict at age 18, less likely for the children, the adolescents to be arrested or use illegal substances. Another study showing a prevention of depression for high risk middle schoolers. And again, in 3 sessions where it really sounds like, I know they don't get into detail, but it kind of sounds like they were just chummy, had some ideas, and and said some nice things to these families, and like that was it. That was the intervention. I'm sure there's a lot more to it than that, but again, the way it's presented in the book, it feels very low impact yet high results. And I think that was a theme through much of this book. There are programs that don't cost a lot, they're not super hard, but have a pretty great return of investment compared to many of the programs that I think we all know or we remember from our childhood that since then have had these, great research studies pointing to how worthless they were and how much time they took up. I also felt like I love those action steps. Were there any other action steps that folks liked from this chapter other than, I know, Jackie, you brought up the idea of, hey, we should use evidence-based practice, which sounds real easy, but man, I don't know about you, but I'm assuming most government people, if you said, I want evidence-based practice, they would say, well, this lobbyist paid me $1 million to convince me that the thing they're selling is evidence-based. Did anyone see the Hulu series Dope Sick? I know Diana did not because she was not in the room when I watched it, but did anyone else see it?
I watched part of it.
Okay, you were asleep in the room when I watched part of it?
I have to leave.
Okay, I'm sorry, because you missed Dope Sick.
Sorry, everyone.
Dinah will return. She's got to pick up a child. But it was a dramatization of the OxyContin crisis. And, with any dramatization, you sort of are like, oh, how much, I know it's based on a journalist's account, but at the same time, how true is this? But it was just the scenes I found the most amusing in like a gallows humor sort of way were the ones where you have these marketers talking about like, here are the things you tell your doctors when you're making them buy your drug and prescribe your drug. And then the scenes where the doctors are parroting what the marketing guy had told them about the drug. And I don't know if it's quite that bad, but the idea of, I think of a doctor as like, well, they must know everything. They're doctors, right? And that they might just be telling me something that someone sold them so that they could sell more of a drug. That idea, that's kind of what if a doctor could do that, I don't expect much from our government officials to do anything other than someone paid me to say this, or they showed me some research that came from their institute of company X. So here we go. So maybe I'm being negative there. What are some other positive action implications? Or do you want to jump on the negative train with me for a minute?
Well, I just, in the spirit of moving on, was going to point out that this is an area, that, as we're talking here, that was one of my points of criticism, and that he almost starts to talk about like privilege, and he gets very close to talking about privilege and how these programs are addressing like an absence of resources for these families, and how they may seem self-evident and very easy, but these families do not live in privileged situations that many middle and upper class people do. And so what's obvious, someone, if the family's willing, has to be available to help them, because it's not evident. As you said, your children did not come with a manual, but you were able to get the resources and have a support network. But he doesn't quite ever mention it. And so I was like, I'm going to just, because it's 2015. It's a recent enough book that I feel like he could have made that point, or at least tried to.
Mm-hmm. Our field wasn't really talking about it in 2015, sadly, though, right? I wish we were, right?
Yeah.
But I agree. Yeah, I wish he would have talked about it. But as a field, I'm not sure we were there yet in 2015, sadly.
Well, Alan,
other fields were.
Yeah, but Alan, let me ask you, and I'm kind of asking you to hypothesize a little much. Do you think part of that might have been because the undercurrent of the book was clearly families in our lower socioeconomic kind of strata or classes, they're going to need this help. So that's where I want to see these kind of more nurturing programs put into place? Or do you think it was, potentially just an oversight or an assumption that we'll just kind of do this?
It's hard to say. I would say that I will say it's important that moving forward, when these types of books are written and publicized, that you address those topics, because there are people who will read this type of book and say, these programs are so easy. If they're so easy, why aren't these families just doing it? It sounds like it's so simple. Anybody could do it. Why haven't you learned? Or why hasn't this been done? That's a privileged point of view. And again, fair. I'm not trashing the book because he doesn't talk about it. 2015 is on the cusp of when that started to become part of the mainstream conversation. But I think it would be why I wouldn't use it, at least not alone, in, say, supervision. Or if I ever teach a university level class, I would want another book that addressed some of that.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, let's move on to the next chapter. So looking at school. So again, broadening from the family to the school. As much as I'm a school guy and I love research in school, I kind of found this chapter, it was fine. Like, if you don't know a lot about schools and you're a parent but don't work in schools, or even a clinician but you don't have a lot of impact on schools, or you sort of just know schools from what your own child is doing there, I think you might find this chapter very fascinating. But as someone who, breathes and lives schools, hey, the good behavior game and positive behavior intervention in sports, those are good programs. Not a lot for me there. I did appreciate the anecdote about the creation of the good behavior game, which I had not heard before, in terms of Muriel Saunders being a teacher in Kansas who hated how much trouble her kids were in her classroom and wanted to quit. And her husband knew, I can't remember if her husband knew Barish or knew Wolf. I think Wolf was his mentor or something. And so they got together and they said, well, what do the kids like to do? And she said, they like to play games and win against each other. And thus the good behavior game was written. But all I could think about in that section, because I've read a lot about the good behavior game, was, man, was Muriel Saunders' husband like super mad that he's studying with Wolf and she's the one who's got like the seminal article published? And it was the 60s too, so maybe he was a little more like free lovey kind of guy, but I'm guessing, he was like, none of my stuff got published, and is remembered fondly as behavioral vaccine. Hopefully he was proud of his wife, but I don't know. It was a different time then. Anything out of this chapter that, again, if you work in a school, there's very little in here I think that's going to surprise you as an effective support or effective nurturing treatment. And then the one there was the positive action section. I had to go to the website because I had no idea what Biglan was talking about when he talked about positive action. It was very, very brief. I have notes about it if anyone wants to hear about it, but again, I don't know if anyone cares that much. It seemed a little wishy-washier compared to the good behavior game data and the data we have on the use of PBIS in schools. But again, hey, great, it's another idea.
Yeah, again, here, I think there could be a discussion of privilege, right? Because not everyone can make sure that their child's homework is done every night and monitor progress and attend all of the meetings, right? And
the good behavior game can be hard to manage when you have an overly large group of students. And you have students that have exceptional needs that aren't being met elsewhere. The good behavior game might not be adequate to help those children develop some of these pro-social skills. I would definitely want to point out, if I were recommending this section, about reading more into why PBIS and ABA are related and generally amicable fields these days. But again, our own history as a field with coercive practices is a legitimate criticism, and PBIS was spawned because of that conversation. This is one of those like, I understand why, but it feels a little whitewashed, and just like, I'm casting this net to say PBIS is, it's part of behavioral science. It's not the same thing as ABA. They get conflated. a little too often because PBIS was born out of a legitimate movement of people who wanted to abandon some of the practices associated with early ABA.
Another thing I think that gets covered over, and again, I think it's tough to critique the book for this shortcoming. When we look at PBIS, it's just how PBIS of the different sort of programs that are thrown out, that is not an easy system to put into place. That is one that it's not going to be like, I had an idea for PBIS and I put it into place in my local school system. No, if you don't have a ton of stakeholders and a bunch of people working together regularly and doing, I mean, like half of PBIS research I've read is very much about procedural integrity checks at the building and the district and the state level, depending on how well you're organizing it. I know Maryland has a ton of research about PBIS. It's very complicated. I mean, like the basics of it, the way it's described in the book, like we just made some rules and everyone could follow the rules. Yeah, that's kind of it. But there's a lot more to PBIS systems that is not really covered in this section. So at the same time, I do think it's not really the place of this book to give a thorough discussion of what PBIS is and is not. But again, it is one of those ideas that if you read it, you might become disheartened if you're like, yeah, PBIS, that sounds like another one of those Anthony Biglan super easy fixes. It is not. It is going to require work. It is effective, but it is a lot of work. But again, I don't think this book is anti-work or anti-effort. But it does sort of throw out every program as like, this is a good program and it's easy to do and it saves a ton of money. I don't even think that's the purpose of some of these, but I think there are enough programs that are meant to be easy fixes that it's hard to know when it's not an easy fix and when it is an easy fix. And I would say PBIS is not an impossible fix, but it's not an easy fix either.
And then let's just throw an RTI on the academic side at the same time as just like, and just when paired with RTI, this other, but again, that goes back to privilege of like, there are communities in school. I worked in a district that had some strong PBIS implementation, but in the Title I schools, it had a distinct flavor that I think should and could be called out as almost seeming like part of the school to prison pipeline. And it's the same materials being used in the schools and our correctional facilities. And it's not effective because it's not being done with fidelity. And there's not outside monitoring. And there's not good data collection. Mm-hmm. And on the individual level, there were teachers who used it coercively, who would withhold tokens and would hold reinforcement as a punishment and be very overt about that and shame students. That's not PBIS. That's not PBIS. And it's very important that be seen and called out and corrected in place. And that can be very difficult to do.
Mm-hmm. There's a component, I think the more we discuss this book, the more I feel like the nurture effect is when you have like an amazing speaker come and talk to you about some new technology or some new line of research, and they have a great PowerPoint presentation and they're spirited, and you leave the 2-hour talk saying, yeah, everything that person said, I'm all for. And then there's no workshop, there's no training follow-up, and a couple weeks later you're like, why did I even like that? Like, what was the point of that?
But that's why he includes action steps. I think
that's true.
That is part of it. I think that may have been criticism he could have received about his book, about it seeming very gung-ho and inspiring, but fall flat. Mm-hmm. Whereas he divides up his audience and say, parents, you can do this. Professionals, you can do this.
Mm-hmm.
I totally agree with you, Alan.
Yeah, that's a great. That's a great point, Alan. Sort of. I wonder if that even came out in the editing of like, this is a fun book, but at the same time, are people just going to read it and be like, yeah, why doesn't somebody do this? Oh well, back to coercion for me, or back to non-nurturing society for me. You're right. I think those action steps do take a good.
To be honest, they're my favorite part of the book. Like, I thought they were the most, I don't know, I found the action implications at the end of every chapter to be like what I was looking for. If I just had like a little like action implications, done.
What did you like about this chapter then? What action implication jumped out at you then, Jackie?
I liked the action implication for educators, right? I liked that one because I thought that educators might read this. And I think the biggest one I thought was, ensure that every child is reading at grade level by the end of third grade, because that doesn't happen.
Well, there's research to show that doesn't happen.
Right. And I just like it, like adopt evidence-based teaching methods, reinforce positive behavior, reduce the use of punishment. Like this for educators part was like, yeah, like I could take this, go to a teacher, say, did you read the school chapter? Right. And it reads well for a teacher. And then it gives really nice, very clear, distinct things that I think could make big changes in classrooms. Right. That might not be happening. Mm-hmm. So this was my, before the educator's action implication part was my favorite part.
Mm-hmm. Alan, what about you? Was there an action implication that you particularly gravitated towards?
Well, in your camp, I like he was so clear about direct instruction as being underutilized.
I was hoping it would come up.
But without throwing discovery-based learning under the bus. Like, that is an important part of what we do. And a lot of, early start Denver model and all these, developmental motivation and PRT, those approaches, starting where the child wants to be and building backwards rather than drilling them to death is a very important lesson. Discovery is key. It's not enough. Mm-hmm. Whole language education. It's very rare that you hear someone just throw whole language education under the bus, which was great. Mm-hmm. I never was a huge fan of it, but always was polite about it because it's very popular still in terms of the lingo and what people learn in teaching colleges. So just the fact that he's like, if there's not doing phonics, parents, if you're not doing phonics with your kid, make sure it happens because it's going to help them read.
Yep. I did love that. If they're not doing phonics in school, tell them to do phonics in school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did think the action implications for parents, and again, I'm a very specific type of parent. I live in a suburban, good school district in Massachusetts, but I did feel like there was something empowering about it, at least to me, in terms of again, not every parent is going to be able to talk to their teacher or have the time to have these conversations. But at the same time, the idea of you do get to, and you should be able to, actually, maybe that was the more important point. You should be able to, as a parent, have some say in the educational system and have some ability to ask questions and have your child's teacher respect you in answering those questions and in having those conversations with
You're
you.
Legally entitled to that, input.
Legally entitled and what is sort of subtly done or mildly coerced is not always the same. Not always the same things. And I think everyone at some point, anyone who works with families has had that thought of ugh, this family's driving me nuts with all their demands. And talking about psychological flexibility, the idea of, you can be frustrated with lots of demands, and it's frustrating to feel like people don't think you're doing a good job. But it's not necessarily about you. It's about the quality of service. And take a step back, get whatever metaphor works for you to remember that's just your thoughts, and now work towards your client. Now work towards working with your family. Now work towards supporting their needs and desires. That's all about compassionate care. That I know we've only had so many articles about that in our own field, but it's true for education in a general education sense of the word, as it is for any of us clinicians working with families. It's important. It's not something that you get for buy-in. It's something that you collaborate on. It's an important component of treatment.
Well, that's why I was always a big advocate of a reputable parent advocate, especially in special education. Most states have at least one organization that is this is a quality, cooperative parent advocacy group that often provides free parent advocates to come to your IEP meetings and help listen to your concerns and to take your concerns, boil them down, make them palatable in an IEP meeting so that you're heard rather than feeling, because if you're agitated about the quality of your child's education, you're probably going to be emotional, and that will fall on deaf ears, unfortunately. It's just a reality. It shouldn't, but it often does. I can say, and I wish more SPED teachers did that too, because I'm like I'm on the parent side ultimately. Like, I know I work with the rest of you, but like, I want the parent to tell me what they want for their child, and then I want to do my best to make it happen. And that's what this is supposed to be about. So, and I like that this it has this section in particular has that, like, ask for this, advocate for this. It's very important.
Hey, everybody, last interruption. I just got to make sure you get our second secret code word. It is whiskey. WHISKEY. Now, you might think, Rob, are you drinking some whiskey? No, Diana totally thought of that. It wasn't me. I don't know why she wanted to use whiskey as our code word, but hey, that's the word, whiskey. And a quick reminder for those of you listening on the Patreon feed, you can go to the main post and you will find an extra third code. It's not a code word. It's actually a code that you can enter when you purchase a CE for this episode to get 100% discount on the episode. So make sure to go to that original post. And again, if you're in the far-flung future when these eventually get unlocked in the free feed, you can't access that post without subscribing to our Patreon page. Sorry, but you can still get CEs if you like through the normal means. But patrons get a little super extra bonus because we love all your support. Thank you. All right, back to the end and back to our wrap-up of the Nurture Effect Book Club. Well, let's move on to chapter 4, Peers and Problems, which this might have been my favorite chapter in terms of answering a question that I, both professionally and personally, have been thinking about a lot over the past years, which is what leads teens and adolescents to engage in deviant behavior, and how can you support your teen, who, for those of you out there who have a teen, is not always the easiest person to communicate with. Maybe some of you remember being a teen. I'm pretty sure that I was always right and my mother was just always on my case when I was a teen. So I don't know what it's like for modern teens who are wrong and their parents should totally be listened to. But again, all joking aside, I really found the research base on this chapter and the story that the research told in terms of where does peer deviancy stem from in terms of those early interactions. And not just the problem is bad kids shouldn't hang out with other bad kids. So that is mentioned as maybe you shouldn't put all of your children with problem behavior, your adolescents with problem behavior in the same classroom. But why would that develop? Why would adolescents who engage in some deviant behavior continue to engage in deviant behavior? And looking at it from a more global perspective of, well, a lot of them come from a lower socioeconomic class, which means they're already under a lot of stress, the pressures of a lot of different stressors. They already are probably behind educationally due to many of the factors we talked about when we discussed meaningful differences in a previous book club. They are much more likely to have less supervision after school. They are already at risk for having fewer friends. And when they find any friend who is willing to hang out with them, spend time with them, probably because they're dealing with the same sort of factors that have led them to have such failure in the social sphere, will engage in some sort of deviant behavior because it's the first thing that's been reinforced potentially in terms of their social interactions, deviant behavior. And talking about it gets reinforced with attention, and it's predictable which of these adolescents will probably later lead to further deviant behavior without some sort of an intervention. And really thinking of that as not a predictable in the sense of there's nothing you can do, big shrug, these kids are bad kids and they'll always be bad kids, but really thinking about, well, what are the components that have led to this behavior? And the fact that we're comfortable with, like, well, the reinforcement they're getting for their, what we, the mainstream society would call deviant behavior, it's the first reinforcement they're getting, but we should punish them for that. It's not going to be effective. And how many other steps could be taken in the meantime, whether it's from an earlier age or even at the stage of adolescence in terms of supporting families, supporting those peers. I just found this not to have all the answers, certainly, but to have a lot of really positive ideas in terms of how we should be thinking of supporting adolescents who are engaged in what we consider deviant or problem behavior and how it's not necessarily going to be easy, but it's not impossible. And certainly the more that's done earlier on, the better. Whether it's they mentioned the family checkup plan, or they're promoting alternative thinking strategies, or the PATHS program. Again, I'd love to get a little more detail, because I think these are populations that, especially post or current or wherever we are pandemic wise, depending on what state you're in and what your COVID levels are looking like, I think this is a group that is severely struggling, and even the kids that we expected they'll be fine are really struggling in terms of mental health issues, in terms of developing quote unquote strange patterns of behavior that the parents don't know how to handle. I really would have loved even more detail here, but again, 2015, Tony Biglan didn't know what we'd be dealing with in 2022.
My ABA sense sort of flared here, and I was like, oh, this would be great material for studying like CMOs, like conditions in which like this reinforcement from these peers continues to be of a higher like strength or quality than all of the coercive systems, which we know coercive systems are horrible. But like, is it not just that they're getting attention, but who they're getting attention from, because they've gotten that attention and the outcomes have been consistent? And is there like, does the, like, again, grouping all of these at-risk youth increases youth smoking in his example? Like, I just had never thought about those things in that way. That, so that came to mind. But yeah, no, this is an area that I have less experience with, but we do need quality after-school programs. And I like, thinking about districts that I've been in or have known about that didn't just have at-risk after-school programs, but everybody could contribute and be a part of it. Those are essential, and we really need those, because it's inclusive peer education. We talk about it in schools during school hours, but we should be talking about it after school. We should have all youth school programs or after school programs.
I love that point, Alan. The idea of how are we going to recommend let's not put all of our at-risk students in one program and then have after-school programs that are only for our at-risk students. You know, hey, maybe it's the best program in the world and the activities are such that there's so much reinforcement for engaging in the, I don't know, whatever the club is, the crocheting club or the RPG club or the video game, whatever it is, that the students don't even have time to talk about deviant behavior with each other. But the idea that we would do that and think that we would get any other outcome other than what you get when you put a lot of at-risk students all together, which is an increase in deviant behavior, specifically, cigarette smoking, for example, is bizarre, is so strange. You're right. We need to have programs that are for everyone so that we can ensure that we have peer models, that we have opportunities for students to work and be and socialize with other students outside of the at-risk category, right? I did wish I had more ideas in that, or I wish that Tony Biglan had presented a little bit more, some more ideas in terms of that. The idea of we shouldn't be putting all of our at-risk students together. A lot of times that happens, though, because schools are really thinking about, resources. We have to put all of the emotional regulation instruction somewhere. We can't do it for everybody. We have to do it for the group. But how do you do that when you don't have the students all in the same group? I mean, some of it, I think, is the idea of how are we funding these services? We need to tell our school systems, we need to tell our funding sources, we want to pay for these services. These are important services. Whether you want to look at it as because we care about children or because I don't want to pay for this garbage when they're adults in the criminal justice system. Like whatever the excuse you need to support a program like this, some of it might come down to the idea of we need to fund more training and more support so that we do not have to, we've only got one teacher who knows how to teach emotional regulation and they can only teach so many kids. So we got to put them all in the same classroom all day long so they can get those lessons. It's one of those sort of like, I guess it makes sense on paper ideas, but I probably will not result in change. I think the Biglan discusses when they were trying to teach not self-monitoring. It was more like executive functioning skills. And he expected, or the researcher doing this expected, well, we have our students doing some of our, other planning related to sort of more nurturing care. We have them getting the self-management technique. That's going to be the group where they get everything. That's going to be the group that really has the best results. And shockingly, that group had poorer results because all of the students were in the same group. All the at-risk students were in the same group together. So we saw an increase in some of those deviant behaviors because they were reinforcing each other's deviant behavior through social attention.
One thing I was thinking about when I was reading this chapter and then the end chapter is that it might be helpful, right, in schools to be proactive rather than reactive, right? So not have like a social emotional classroom, right? But teach general proactive social emotional skills to all students, right? And assess where people are at. So that's kind of where I kind of like fuse the end of the book, right? With this chapter is that I think what he wanted to say is that everyone should be getting that sort of instruction.
Mm-hmm.
McDonald and Haberman present you with packaged curriculum.
Right? We're doing it. Woo woo.
I think what that curriculum would need to look like, though, still needs some further development. Sure. I think pre-pandemic SEL, social emotional learning, that was like hot. That was like the hot term in schools. But you'd sort of turn to someone and be like, what is this exactly? And you'd get sort of like the blank look of like, I don't know. I was hoping you knew. I think we have some.
This isn't your school, Rob.
Is that just in my school?
No, I'm just kidding.
I'm pretty sure that's every educator who's like, social emotional, like, sounds good. Great taste, less filling. I don't really know how to do it.
I think that's almost verbatim what you said in the episode about social emotional learning too.
Yeah,
that it was
did.
just this like nebulous concept. Important, but not well defined and therefore not well implemented.
Mm-hmm.
It's my favorite line of research. It seems effective in various studies. Why? Big shrug. I love those.
You know why?
I think that, throughout all of these, his point is we should be doing more prevention. And what's the phrase? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? That should have been the third tagline of this paper. And I know in a few spots he's like, wow, if we spend this much money, then we save this much money down the road, right? But I don't know, like maybe because I'm not an economist, like that doesn't sound compelling to me.
It's a policymaker angle. That's how you sell it. That is right. How, when I've had to talk to Congress people, you like, well, how much is this going to cost? Well, how much will it save in the long run?
Right.
I'm being elected today, Mr. Haberman, not next week. I need the money now.
But I think that if you stop and think like, well, what is the savings that he's mean? What does he mean by savings, right? Like, what is it down the road that we would be paying for if we don't do this type of prevention now? And the things down the road that you're paying for are some type of, remedial schooling, incarceration, drug addiction programs. Like, those are the outcomes that he's really talking about, that he's couching in terms of like money that's going to be spent later. And for me, maybe because I'm, on the social side of things, like that to me is a lot more compelling.
Mm. It's because you're a cold-hearted Scrooge McDuck, Diana, and you just care all about the money.
Money. I feel like Biglan is kind of a pragmatic hippie.
That's a great description. I love that.
And my best friend.
Tony, my buddy.
Isn't that true of a lot of this generation of behavior scientists?
Yeah.
Yes, for sure. Yeah.
That's where I belong.
I am starting to feel like I've become. I don't know if it's just like an age thing or what it is, but I'm definitely feeling the kind of hippy dippy vibes that some members of our field are putting out, and I'm kind of going with it. As much as I always thought of myself as a real straight shooter G-man, I think I'm getting hippy dippy.
I think it suits you.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know why you shaved your beard off.
Stop. No, the listeners don't know that I accidentally shaved most of my beard off. They can't see.
I will say this. This is funny because it feels like this isn't being talked about all that much. I suggest everybody get on TikTok if you're not on TikTok and get on soft parenting. Though, like this or these conversations being had by real people and parent advocates being like, treat your child with this way. Use reinforcement, use coaching, talk to them after the emotion, later down the line. Those are the conversations being had on a very granular level. And those families aren't connected with us, the people that are advocating for it directly. They're in the trenches. So I listen. I try not to contribute. I try to listen to what they're saying and be like, okay, like if I'm going to talk about this, this is a way this is how it's being talked about right now by people. And I don't have to sound old and dusty. I can be, and potentially even draw an example from, somebody. So these conversations are actually being had very loudly right now, just in other spaces.
You are not old and dusty, Alan, by the way.
Well, thank
Alan,
you. I just don't want to sound old and dusty. That's the...
Alan, you can come over to my house and show me.
Download TikTok.
No, stop it. Alan's going to come over and show us how to set our TikToks.
Okay, Grandpa.
Alexa.
So I think at the last chapter in this part, talking about psychological flexibility. So this is the ACT chapter. And I sort of agree with Dr. Reed's review. This was probably one of the most amusing and entertaining ways to learn about what ACT is and what psychological flexibility is in terms of just hearing. It's pretty much a chapter in which Tony Biglan discusses his development as a clinical psychologist and sort of what worked from behavior analysis, what worked from psychology, what worked with sort of Carl Rogers client-centered therapy, what worked with CBT, which wasn't as much. And then the day when Steve Hayes sent him a chapter of his book, which would kind of go on to become much of kind of our initial understanding of ACT, and really kind of getting an idea on, not a lot of relational frame theory, though it is briefly mentioned here, really just the idea of a value-centered action. And
I thought it was funny. He was like, Steve Hayes didn't know me. He just sent me this chapter.
Yeah, are they buddies now? They must be buddies now because Steve Hayes wrote the foreword to this book.
It was like a cold email.
Steve Hayes, he was all pimply, and he came for, I got this manuscript on ACT. Dr. Biglan, could you read it for me? I don't know. I'm imagining that's what it was.
I don't know.
Someday we'll ask them, I'm sure. That's what you get on this show, folks. You get the deep questions. And then
that schizophrenia example, I really wanted a lot more detail there.
I think it would frustrate the readers if they went into a discussion of all of the underpinnings of ACT and then a deep scientific study on schizophrenia, which is I think for the layperson a very poorly understood diagnosis.
It's poorly understood for me. That's why I wanted to read more.
We got to read about schizophrenia. Did we do a schizophrenia episode?
No.
We talked about doing one at one point.
Bach and Hayes, 2002, Diana. That's the article he signed.
I guess I can go read that.
Who were we talking? Because we had some. I was emailing some folks about their schizophrenia research.
I don't know.
That shocked me never. We should do an episode on that. There is some really good research on schizophrenia treatment. I had not read any of the ACT research on schizophrenia treatment, but I definitely would like to. But, because I think that would be the extreme example. When you sort of hear the idea of your thoughts, and metaphors to sort of diffuse yourself from your thoughts, and then you can focus on your value-based action. Like that in itself kind of sounds like, that makes sense. I get that. But then when you think about serious mental illness, you're like, well, this stuff's not going to work. And then the fact that they had, significantly improved results from the individuals, schizophrenic individuals who went through ACT. And again, what was it? 4 hours of treatment? 4 hours of ACT treatment. When we think of schizophrenia, you're thinking, hundreds and hundreds of hours of intensive psychotherapy plus severe medications. And you get 4 hours.
Right, but we also don't know the longitudinal effects of that, right? So
no, but looking at just briefly.
Briefly, everything works, right? Even placebo works briefly. Let's put it out there.
Well, briefly, but ACT briefly worked better than other treatment options in terms of the rehospitalization percentages. So that's promising.
It is promising. I just, I don't want to discount, right, I don't want to discount like all the treatment that people have been through if they are schizophrenic, and just like, why haven't you done ACT? Like it's not a cure all, and it's not going to help everyone. So I just
if you were an ACT provider, Jackie, you wouldn't say, why haven't you done ACT? You would invite them to think about ACT. I got an eye roll from Alan, which means I've done my job.
No, I'm just surprised if you were there in person, you may have gotten a punch in the face right there. Deservedly so.
I like ACT. I'm a fan. I think I'm the most ACT friendly on the of our three original trio here. But in any case, ACT is briefly discussed. I feel like this is probably the least discussed of the kind of the four pillars. But really, the key parts of ACT, I think, are not so much the idea of ACT so much as psychological flexibility, supporting individuals acting, not capital ACT, but lowercase, acting in terms of their values, and the idea of let's look for as many kind of universal programs as possible when it comes to, we can't just target every problem as an individual problem. We have to sort of look at what are the common themes, and then which procedures, which treatments, which programs hit the majority of those themes in terms of getting, the best return on investment for, long-term supportive treatment and supportive outcomes. Anything else people want to say? Action implications. We kind of skipped it on the last chapter. Any action implications that jumped out when it comes to psychological flexibility? The Happiness Trap got a shout out. The book that lost to the Nurture Effect.
I have it somewhere. I bought it.
I did too, and I never read it. I suggested it to somebody, and a teacher read it in like one day and came in with all these great ideas. And I was like, I'm glad you enjoyed that book. Trying to not mention, like, I haven't actually read it. I have a copy of it sitting on my shelf, but I heard good things. I read ACT Made Simple. I read that, and then some other books, but.
I have personally incorporated quite a lot of ACT in my own therapy journal, so I'm a big proponent of it, but that's on a personal level. I still have a lot to learn before I implement it professionally. So that's always a sort of caveat that I throw out there. I think that I like the idea behind, say, Mark Dixon's AIM curriculum, incorporating, again, a social emotional curriculum around ACT. Implementation, as I have learned more about it, I have found difficult with some of my clients because just his curriculum, his examples are a little all over the place. It could be a little more cohesive, but he's trying to do something new, so I get it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think ACT is helpful, and I suggest people who may want to consider adding it to their own therapy regimen talk about it with their mental health professional. But other than that, I don't have a lot to say because he basically just recommends that people learn about psychological flexibility.
Yeah.
So.
One thing that I would recommend from this chapter, if you're looking for more, if you're like, oh, ACT is new and you're looking for more, I mean, you can go look at ACT, but I would really encourage, there's a special issue right now in Behavior Analysis and Practice. It's the March 2022 issue where they have some discussion on whether ACT is actually behavior analytic or not. So there's two articles, one published by Tarbach, Sazo, and Acclain, talking about behavior analysis, behavior ACT being part of the scope, right? And then there's also a response to that, suggesting maybe the opposite. So if you're kind of wondering where you lie on this and kind of what the discussion is around, should behavior analysts be engaging in acceptance and commitment therapy within their scope of practice? Does that hit within us? I think those are two really great papers to read.
Is it scope of competence, scope of practice, Jackie, or is it ACT as is or is not a part of behavior analysis, or is it both?
Should we be engaging in ACT practices as behavior analysts? Is that within our scope of competence?
Okay,
or is ACT behavior analytic?
Okay, so two related but separate questions.
Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting, that special issue. I'm still learning, things, but that special issue has been interesting for me.
Yeah, I know for me, the idea of thoughts as thoughts and not as actions, sort of as kind of one of the core pieces. And then like, the various metaphors to sort of diffuse yourself from the thoughts, and then you can take value related actions. I feel like that is such a, I just love it. Regardless of where you fall in the conversation, I just think that idea is, I have personally found very helpful. And I know I've mentioned it to other people, and sometimes they hear it and they're like, oh, that's interesting. I've said it to a couple people, and it's like blown their minds. Like, wait, what? My thoughts? I don't have to think this, and then that's my whole life? Oh my God. It's weirdly liberating. So again, perhaps your mileage may vary, but yes, lot to read and lot to learn about. And you won't learn about a ton in chapter 5 here, but you will get like a smattering, a little smackerel of ACT in the Nurture Effect. And it's mostly through anecdote.
Yeah, mostly through anecdote. But I do encourage, you to explore all sides of the story, right? As behavior analysts, we need to be skeptical and have philosophical doubt. So I think reading both sides is helpful to decide where you're going to be.
Yeah, and I think some of the pros that Biglan has in terms of it sort of possibly presents like a universal answer to a majority of problems. That is one of the things I know that's always been a little concerning to me about ACT, and I know there's a lot of positive research, so I don't want to sort of like speak ill without having read a lot of that research. But anytime someone tells me, no, this thing works for everything, that does tend to raise my like research red flag of like, it doesn't work. Everything, come on. Like, I'm going to have to see a lot of data before I drink all of that Kool-Aid. I'll take some sips here and there, but I don't know if I drink the whole pitcher of Kool-Aid, man.
This is also the chapter where he does get into a little bit about there being schisms and conversations and different ideas. Talking, it feels very teachery in a way, because Bandura I've only ever really read a lot about when I was learning about my teacher education side of things. He did not come up all that often in my APA program. But again, this is a chapter where he does go into that. So for anyone who's interested in what that conversation has looked like in the past, this is one of those places that Biglan does talk about it.
Yeah. All right, so we're kind of coming to the end of the book, and kind of as we mentioned at the top, part 3 really gets into the larger themes, and this really starts getting outside of, I think, the realm of behavior analysis. So we're going to kind of briefly hit some of the broad strokes, and then part 4, like we said, it's a summary. So if you listen to the previous 2 hours of this podcast, don't bother reading part 4. Or, I mean, do, certainly. It's not that long a book, but you could skip it, and yet you haven't missed very much. Dinah, I'd like to start with you kind of, I think we're going to kind of mush all of part 3 together. We talk about sort of looking at societal change. We talk about the marketing specifically related to cigarette advertising and what that might mean in terms of other marketing, say for obesity and for alcohol consumption. And then we talk about how capitalism has become super gross. And we did a little bit of that at the top. But I know, if you wanted to bring up, I don't know if you wanted to talk specifically about capitalism, but I know you did specifically text me while at one of our son's baseball games, and I was home with one of our other children, and you texted me like something like that, the chapter on capitalism, woof, or something. Like you seemed shocked, like the whole thing really was upsetting to you or frustrating to you. I couldn't quite tell.
I am not shocked in any way, shape, or form by this chapter.
Did it just reinforce your negative ideas about how gross capitalism has become?
Yes.
And I love stuff, folks. If I'm telling you it's gross, the lover of buying things, there's got to be something wrong here.
You really do love stuff.
I'm the least I care about values rather than things person on this podcast. And I am just, I'm so upset about this chapter. So you done screwed up capitalism if I'm against you.
No, I mean, I think, I'm 42 years old, and so my entire existence has coincided almost perfectly with the complete and utter decline of beneficence within our society. At least in ways as reflected by the capitalist system. I think there are other ways in which we are doing better with our, hopefully we'll continue to do better with our, appreciation of people. Mm. But no, nothing surprised me here. I don't actually remember precisely what I was commenting on in that chapter, or which of these last few chapters it was.
Chapter 9, the recent evolution of corporate capitalism.
Oh yeah, that was probably the one.
Which
It
sort
was
of
just rough to read, but it's just, confirming everything I think that has really been sort of highlighted for anyone paying attention in the last several years. And, we're at a point now, I think, I'm just talking about America, right, where it's so clear that most people are not able to access what they need. And that's to the benefit of those who have a lot of money and who are the people who are in charge of a lot of the systems in our country. And I'm not an expert in this area, so I don't want to keep talking, really. But it's tough when you are looking at problems of this magnitude as just a one person who doesn't have a lot of influence, because the level of them feels really insurmountable.
yeah.
Just to piggyback off of that, because that goes into exactly the point that I think of, that I think you had stepped away, but the privileged point of view that he often takes and doesn't address for reasons we've discussed. I also was frustrated that he didn't in any way, shape, or form that I could see talk about anything about like intersectionality and about how these systems has specifically affected certain subgroups, and how to get those subgroups on board with this will probably involve a lot of nuanced conversations. And you can't, and he gets very almost saviory. We need to save ourselves from capitalism, and here's my solution. Mm-hmm. But the solutions need to involve a lot of different voices and need to address the needs of a lot of subcommunities. A lot of these programs were implemented in times, and the institutions that he talks about being positive have some negative associations because they did not address reality. They addressed either suburban middle-class life or like low socioeconomic status white people, or that kind of issue. Yeah. So I would say that going forward, if you want to take this book and go with it, an important component would be to listen to people talking about intersectionality and different experiences, whether it's being a person of color in the modern world or a person who's LGBTQ+. Behavioral science has affected these groups in negative ways strongly. And so their criticisms and their survivorship needs to be heard before we move on and implement these things effectively.
I think probably the easiest section in this whole section, or whole part, would be chapter 6, which really just looks at how does medicine track serious diseases, and could we set up a series of measurement systems, which, hey, behavior analysts, we love our measurement systems, but focusing on wellness and focusing on the wellness of our societies. What are the measurable outcomes that we might want to look at in terms of risk factors? So it could be things like monitoring illicit drug use or alcohol consumption would be some. We could look at psychological, the rates of individuals reporting psychological problems or in treatment for psychological problems is some ideas. And there are a couple systems. I think monitoring the future is one he mentioned, and the CDC's youth risk behavior surveillance system. But could we combine a few of these to have some wellness inventories that we share? And then in the last section, even mentions in his sort of dream of the utopian future that we'll find ourselves in, the idea that the wellness index is something that individual citizens in America care about as much as, say, our economic, markers of success, right? Even more so, how are we paying attention to some of these? So something that gets reported, which means it's something we can observe, which means it's something we can measure, and then therefore we can understand whether we are or are not affecting change in that area. So I do think that was a kind of an interesting way to take a problem that seems very, very, well, it is very, very large, to try to bring it down to something that, we behavior analysts understand, which is the need to measure and analyze our data, but in a way that doesn't feel like, too huge an analysis of data. Looking at sort of what are the key markers that might, and again, we will probably, different groups and different individuals will debate which are the most important markers, but certainly I'm sure we could agree on a couple that are somewhat relevant, if not telling the whole story.
And what do we do with people who want to opt out of these systems? And how do we address that as we make these systems? Because you should be able to opt out. Otherwise, it's not a nudge, it's coercive.
Mm-hmm.
Or sludge. It's sludge. Remember, everybody? Oh, so much fun. Jackie, how about you? You've been a little quiet about this part. Was there a section in here that spoke specifically to you or that you felt was more relevant to sort of our kind of day-to-day behavior analyst lifestyle, whether it was the marketing or the capitalism measurements?
For me, what resonated with me was when they talked about prevalence and epidemiology and disease, because I was like, COVID, right?
Yeah.
So in that one, I think I resonated most there. But at this point, I felt tired when I was reading this book in this part, and I wanted more, and I just didn't get enough in this part. That's how I kind of felt. Like it was like you could have taken that part of the book and just made its own book and given that like, more, right? So but
it was a tough read.
I was left wanting.
Well, it's hard because I love the setup of the book starting really small and then getting increasingly larger as it goes through. But for a book that's meant to be sort of a survey of what's out there, inherently you can't talk about how marketing has harmed the American people without discussing 60, 70 years worth of research and data, looking at it from various legal as well as commercial standpoint. There's no like easy fix when it comes to those issues. And you notice it in the action implications when we were talking about those first chapters, like what can parents do? What can the individual do? What can teachers do? In this section, it was sort of like, what can the president do? What can space aliens who come to help us do? It was like these very broad categories. Like you're moving so far from the individual, because these are the sections. Part 3 is very much a section of what can you as an individual do? Nothing. You can't do anything. It's a societal problem.
Yeah, and I wish these chapters also would have ended with those action implications in a way that's like, okay, what can you do right now? What can you do about capitalism? What can you do about poverty and inequality? What can we talk about?
Make a podcast episode. We did it, everybody.
Yeah. So that's where I felt wanting. But I guess that's good. Now you can make a new nurture effect too.
Well, I suppose the implicit advice there would be for policymakers and for educators, those should be things that people who have power over or influence over should advocate that those people be doing. So if they're not doing those things, by the way, it's getting really dark here, so my video has just gone black.
That's okay. We should be done soon anyway, right, Alan?
Those people should be advocating that for those policymakers and educators should be taking those steps. He doesn't ever say that, but you could kind of make that leap, that look for what people are doing. If they're not doing it, make them do it. Mm-hmm. Which is hard. That's not easy by any means.
I figured out the chapter that I wrote you about is not chapter 9. It was chapter 8, the one on income inequality. Oh, that was the one that for me, just every page felt like another stab into the heart.
The grossest chapter in many ways.
Yeah, because there just are not systems set up in our country to assist people and the safeguards that need to be in place in order for just regular everyday people to live their lives without fear of bankruptcy over any number of things, the medical and insurance systems that we have, the level of minimum wage that we have, the housing situation that we're all currently experiencing. These are all just setting people up to absolutely fail. And if we're trying to, raise children in this type of environment, it's set up for failure. And that this chapter for me was just infuriating to think that this is the type of country that we have, and no one is doing much to make changes there.
And at least we're all acutely aware of it after COVID. I mean, it's the conversations we're having now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And this chapter definitely, I think, captured sort of the comments you made at the beginning of the episode, Alan, in terms of the sort of like, well, they've got to learn. There's very little research. If I don't want to say there's none research, but I would not be shocked if there was absolutely no research to point to taking an attitude of, well, people in those low socioeconomic classes, they've got to learn their lesson, as being such a harmful, completely backwards, and completely lacking in solution attitude in terms of benefit to everybody. When we don't support individuals who are in our lowest socioeconomic classes, we are, banishing individuals to completely being stuck in those cycles and having no way to escape them. And as much as you might say, well, lucky for me, I'm in the middle class or I'm in the upper middle class, so I don't have to worry about that. Those costs affect everybody. It's not like, well, no, you're on some sort of a magic island where you only have to be with other people like
where's
you.
Your humanity?
Live as part of a society. Yeah, I mean, aside from just that idea of humanity, like, wouldn't you want to see success for everybody? Like, isn't that part of the, it's a little fakey, but let's pretend that's the American dream again, right? Anyone can do anything. Well, clearly not. If you want that to be the dream, we got to take some other action steps first, and then maybe we can actually, live that sort of somewhat fallacious statement. But it's not going to happen by just assuming, oh, nope, I'll let people do their own thing, and it'll all work out in the end.
That seems like a really good ending point, Rob.
Oh, Jackie, you're just saying that so I end the podcast, I think.
No,
But
I'm not. I mean,
right,
we're 5 minutes over, but I think it is, though. I think it's a good kind of segue that we have to be proactive, right? We have to look at the contingencies.
Yeah.
We have to promote novel, pro-social behavior across all. And, we have to kind of tear down the mess that we've made and build something new.
We have to take a moral stance.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
That's true. And in that regard, I think we all like the action steps, but I think looking at the nurture effect, whether or not you felt it was fully successful, whether or not there are definitely some flaws,
Maybe
some
we
areas
should
we
rate
wanted
it
more on.
as a good behavior analytic book, a bad behavior analytic book, or a book that's not even about behavior analysis.
What is this, the Flophouse?
It's a different podcast that we listen to.
In any case,
I think it was a good behavior analytic book.
I think it was
Given
as well.
all of the caveats that we have already addressed.
Yes, and I don't think we're going to get through a 2-hour discussion of a book without finding some things that we wish were different or a little bit better. But overall, I think it did put me in a personally in a much more positive attitude.
Oh no, I'm spiraling.
Oh, you're spiraling. Okay, I see. That's not good. If you're spiraling and I'm optimistic, we're really in trouble, folks. So again, I think would we all like at least somewhat recommend this to our behavior analysis community, if not to our non-behavior analysis community?
No, I'm good. I've said everything I want to say.
Well, you can just give the thumbs up, and then you have to say thumbs up because no one
Thumbs
can see
up.
your thumb. Okay. All right. So
Alan's in the dark, but I think his thumb
was up.
Thumbs up with caveats.
All right. We're all thumbs up with some caveats, some more than others. So overall, I think Nurture Effect really does accomplish what it set out to do, at least in terms of getting ideas out there. We hope that you enjoyed hearing us discuss this book. Again, like most of our book clubs, I'd love to go even longer, but I know not everyone agrees with me. So we're going to wrap up here. So, hey, I guess you're just going to have to listen. And then if it sounds promising, go ahead, read the book yourself. It's a pretty quick read. All right, well, that brings us to the end of the episode. If you are listening to this in about May or early June of 2022, we want to thank you so very much for supporting us on Patreon so that we can continue to do these super long deep dives into books, and we continue discussing about what is going to help our society through behavior analysis or behavioral sciences. Let's use the broader term. I want to thank my fabulous co-hosts, Jackie and Diana and Alan, for being here and bringing up so many awesome points. And if you're listening to this way in the future, when this finally, at some point this ends up dropping on our free feed, I hope you're listening to this and saying, what a waste of time, because all of these things are already in place.
Then we'll delete it.
And economic inequality is what? I read about that in the history books of the far off land of 2022. We really hope that's the case. I'm kind of worried it won't be. But oh well, let's be optimistic and hope for the best in the future. So everyone, thank you so much for listening. Bye.